on improving data asset management to improve insights and use of AI. So we're going to welcome Erika-Kirsten Easton, the Chief Data Officer and Director General of Enterprise Service, Transport Canada. Thank you. Thanks.
All right, good morning, everyone. Set up here. So I'm going to start off by saying something that MIT recently published. 80 to 95% of AI initiatives fail. So does that mean that we have to just give up on AI and go back to the old way of doing things? No. But what it does mean is that we need to understand why it fails. And in most cases, it's because the data was not ready to deliver. So let's take a look at why. So I can tell you, as a Chief Data Officer at Transport Canada, it excites me to no end whenever I hear about the excitement and the AI revolution. Because not only does the automation and the AI technology allow us to really improve on back office functions, productivity, and our analytics, but it really provides a renewed focus for data asset management. Leaders are starting to realize that without proper data, they can't do good AI. So the next 20 minutes, what I'm going to focus on is what goes wrong and what we're doing at Transport Canada to improve data asset management so that we can optimize the use of AI. So the biggest issue that I'm hearing these days are leaders around a boardroom table saying, we need to use AI. How are we going to use AI to solve our problems? That's not their job. Instead, what they need to be doing is asking, what is the problem we are trying to solve? They need to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So we need to make sure that we have that data maturity to enable the AI. So let's talk about that a little bit. So as you can imagine, Transport Canada, being a regulatory agency and also an economic department, is data rich. We collect plethora of data for the regulatory purposes, through the regulatory purposes, and for all the different analysis that we have to do. But I can tell you that we are data management poor, and we've been looking to address that. But Transport Canada is not alone. In the public sector, I think we have a problem across different departments at different levels of government. And I think there's a real opportunity to fix that, and AI really helps us leapfrog in that regard. So we need to take that holistic approach to properly design the data that we have, design the applications, the data that's within the applications as well, that will then enable the AI solutions. I often say that we use data like disposable plastic bottles. We use it, and then we put it away. We do an analysis, and then we just throw it away, instead of looking at where else in the organization can also utilize that same data. And that creates a lot of data debt within the organization. It's an accumulation of poor data management practices. You have incomplete data, inaccurate data, duplication, siloed data within the organization, and oftentimes unstandardized or lack of standards between the different data sets. And that builds up over time, and it's costly, it's difficult to access or even know that it exists. But whenever you start to use AI, those costs can multiply. So at Transport Canada, we focused on a few key areas, a few key initiatives to improve data asset management. So first off, we are very lucky. We've had an enterprise data infrastructure in place for many years. So we have been collecting information and data. We have data storage, and that is also the same ecosystem that we use to enable different AI technologies. But what we don't have, or what we didn't have until we started this data asset management initiative, was proper data management and visibility on the data that we have. Think about different groups within an organization, not putting it into that container, and instead keeping it on their computers to do their analysis. Nobody even knows it exists. So to be able to have that visibility of the data We have implemented a centralized data catalog where we have stripped it right down to the studs and looking at the metadata, because there was a catalog as part of the ecosystem, but I can tell you we had stuff like Bob's Data 1, Bob's Data 2. Well, Bob retired in June, so we need to know what's actually in there because we don't have Bob to go to anymore. In that identification of metadata and information, really looking at the fields within the catalog and how people are searching for the information, what they need to know in terms of the different domains and how we organize the data, and then also identifying who the data stewards are, who we need to go to find out more about the data. There are obviously safeguards in place. We identify what the access is for the different data sets. So even though it's in the catalog, doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all and everybody gets to access it. There are still confidentiality, privacy measures in place to make sure that the data is safeguarded and well utilized. But we knew that just putting the catalog in place and making the data visible wasn't going to have people banging down our doors. They weren't going to be looking to do extra work to have their data cataloged or even ingested into the ecosystem. So what we have put in place is a data purchase process, data acquisition process, in fact, where all data that is coming into the department has to come through the Chief Data Office. So procurement, when they find out that somebody's looking to put in place a contract or make a purchase, they now refer the data owners, the data stewards, to us to do that review. And what we're doing is finding out what data people are bringing into the organization, making sure that it's cataloged, getting the metadata, getting the data dictionary so that we have that starting of standardization and knowing what we have. And then that allows us to start to establish the data lineage and the provenance tracking, and then to start to really enforce some of those governance policies, the data definitions, and the metadata, like I mentioned. The other thing we are investing in is data quality, data integrity training to make sure that we have good, reliable data. And then to really speed up things, we are looking at the automation of data ingestion and then the automation of the data catalog information. So one of the biggest things that we have focused on within the organization is the practice of hoarding data. All across the organization, we are seeing, like I mentioned, people are taking data. They don't want to share it because it's just that special data that they need. They are afraid that other groups are not going to be able to interpret properly the data that they have. But to be able to be data rich, we need to be able to share that data. So we've introduced a mantra at TC, Transport Canada, and it's data for TC, not for me. And I'm starting to hear people repeat it. So it's getting through. It's really creating that focus on data for the betterment of the organization. It allows us to do better risk assessments, but that culture shift really does take time. And to create the conditions for this to succeed, we had to put in place a governance model. So I think a lot of departments at different levels are looking at some form of federated model. You can have centralized, decentralized, some sort of shared responsibility. So at Transport Canada a couple of years ago, we implemented what you see on the left, which is the federated model, where the Chief Data Office at the center establishes the policies, the governance, and that the data stewards, the data owners, will have a lot of leeway in terms of how they're governing their data. We're realizing now that we need to adopt a little bit more of that gravitational pull at the center. So we are now looking at what you have on the right, which is a franchised model. Really having that central management. As I mentioned, we already have the infrastructure, getting the governance in place, the policies and guidance. That doesn't change from the federated model. But the standards, the acquisition of the data, the cataloging of it, really looking at the quality of the data literacy across the organization, data literacy and AI literacy, of course, and then the data science and the application of AI and everything that goes around that. The business areas still maintain the responsibility for their analytics. They know their data, they know what they're feeding into. But making sure that the organization has one common way of managing the data, of defining it, is really important, which is why that franchise model is the way we are going. So I'll leave you with an example of what is possible when you use the power of data in an enterprise way. So as I mentioned, Transport Canada, we put in place org structures with the creation of the Chief Data Office, the role that I have as Chief Data Officer, all the necessary governance, the frameworks, the guidance, all of the AI enablement that we're putting in place, the governance around that. But where we are making the most headway, and I think we heard that yesterday with a lot of examples and case studies from some other colleagues who are here today, or who are here this week, is getting aligned on data management through the development of actual proofs of concept. So we're really showing the importance of getting data in one place and utilizing it for the whole organization. So the example I have is at Transport Canada, we have multiple uses of geographic information system applications, so GIS applications. So think maps. Best way to describe it. And those maps have different data sets, different data points, depicted as images. And they're used for different purposes. We have our emergency management group who uses it to predict and to monitor, to monitor what's happening across Canada that impacts on the transportation system. So think wildfires, floods, labor disruptions, things like that. And then we have our economic analysis group who has their own GIS application to look at the impact on economic productivity of the transportation sector, utilizing different but some similar data points. So none of what has been built has been comprehensive, nor has it looked at what the whole organization needs. And what it's meant is that you have multiple duplicative data sets in GIS applications that are costing the organization inordinate amount of money to store and to utilize. So earlier this year, my team of data scientists built an initial base map of the transportation sector in Canada. So think about transportation infrastructure, rail, marine ports, locks, roads, airports, landing strips, all those types of things. Added some high-value layers, cell phone towers, emergency services, grain elevators, all the different things that we could encounter in terms of the internal trade aspects enabled by transport sector. And then created a consistent look and feel, and then we looked for a use case to really see and test whether or not this common GIS application could work for the organization. So we we're coming into the summer, coming into wildfire season, so we decided to work with our emergency management group and our economic analysis group by creating one GIS application for the impacts of disruptions created by wildfires. NRCan, Natural Resource Canada, has near real-time data that we were able to bring into this map. And what you see here are actually kind of a depiction of the heat map of the wildfires at different points within Canada. And it allows us to see how close it is to different infrastructure and what the impacts could be. But that's just one piece. What we were able to do, because we had a unified set of data and a lot more data at our disposal from across the organization, we were able to develop a predictive model enabled by AI to look at the flow of commodities across the country and predict the implications of various disruptions on that commodity flow. And that is proving to be instrumental to some of our economic analysis, and we're going to continue to grow it with other types of information and different business cases using that base model and being able to toggle on and off different features and layers, and then applying different predictive models to be able to look and inform different parts of our business. So getting the right data environments in place, it takes time. And at Transport Canada, we're on our way. We're certainly not there, but we are definitely on a good path forward. But if we're going to be able to really harness the power of AI, we do need to get better data management so that we can create those improved insights. So I will go to questions. There's a microphone moving. Yep.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. So I see you kind of transitioned, like many others, from like the mesh architectural concept, like the federated model where you have hub and spoke. There are risks in there where some groups will be more developed than others. So you moved from the hub and spoke into a franchise model where you centralize, but then you offer some franchise services to the business unit. So how did you implement that? So are you giving SMEs, like data engineers, resources to those business units to work on data that you hold within your data management platforms? Or you provide the tools, you provide the access to data, and the business units will do their own things within the platforms that you provide? So this is question number one. Question number two, your data catalog. What's in it? Are you ingesting data from databases, data warehouses, SharePoint, share drives, everything, or are you targeting specific, what we call like finished goods, like reports, dashboards, stuff that people use to build their day-to-day reportings or their strategic reporting? So what's in that catalog, and how could it help mature your data management? Over.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I may have to ask you to repeat the second question because I may not have fully understood, but let me try.
Yeah, no worries. For the data catalog, I wanted to understand, what is it hosting? What do you put in that data catalog? So would you find like thousands of tables, databases, etc., or is it only a catalog of stuff that people actually use? For instance, if I have a SQL database sitting somewhere with 300 tables, I don't know how many columns and fields, I don't want to see that in a catalog, right? But I would like to see actual reports and dashboards that people use, like a budgeting report, like a planning report, like something that people actually use for analytics. I would like to see that in a catalog. But a name of a table or fields, or sometimes, I don't want to see that in a catalog. So it creates like so many records that it makes it very hard to search things in a catalog. So I wanted to understand, how did you go with implementing that catalog? So I'm in the process of implementing catalog. That's why I'm asking the question. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. So for your first question, we are, as I mentioned, we have an enterprise infrastructure, and we are enabling the tools to allow for the visualization, for the storage of data, Databricks, data lakes, all those types of things, and then to be able to enable AI. There are still instances, fewer, but there are still instances of disparate systems. We are currently taking a whole, basically taking a whole server, that a group somehow acquired years ago to keep all of their data and analytics, and we are migrating that onto the enterprise. But along with that requires skilling of the organization. I mentioned the data quality aspect, but it's more than just that. It's really understanding data and people understanding what the data represents and what it means to the organization, not to just them, that, data for TC, not for me kind of thing. It really does really unpack that and make sure people understand that. Right now, and we don't see all of the analysts coming as part of the Chief Data Office. We can't be a catch-all. So those analytics will still happen within the business areas, but guided by a common set of data, common set of standards of data, looking at how we categorize, how the methodologies align. Because as we've started to unpack it, we're realizing one group is putting up an analysis to the deputy minister or to the minister that differs from what another group is using. And sometimes their estimated arrival times and their weight standards are different, so they're giving different advice. And so we are looking to make sure that we address that piece. The data catalog has information, has metadata about the data sets and about some of the key data products as well, but not everything. And it really is the metadata around it, which then you can go through and access. So that's good.
Just maybe as a follow-up to that, because you took charge of owning a lot of the data, are you in charge of all of the cleaning, standardization, semantic layer, all of that, or are you still partnering with the business units to come up with that? But my main question was also, was there some event or, burning fire that got you to that step of being able to integrate? Because in talking to a lot of colleagues, we still struggle in organizations to get everybody on the same page behind the movement of organizing your data, overcoming privacy challenges, and getting kind of that burning platform in the organization. So what was your journey like in terms of getting everybody on side? And I'm assuming you had some more senior executive level support for that.
Yeah, we're really lucky at Transport Canada where our deputy minister sees the value of data. He's an accountant by trade, and our associate deputy minister was around for Lac Mégantic. So they understand the importance of having data, understanding the data, being able to use it for risk assessments, and being able to leverage it for proper insights within the organization. So that we have been very lucky in that regard. We sit on pins and needles every time that Prime Minister announcement comes out about changes in the ranks, because we know that we're lucky that we have their drive at the senior executive tables to do what we are doing right now. But we're starting to see it across the organization. As like I mentioned, AI is really driving the change that we need because everybody wants to use that technology. And as we start to explain why we can't quite do what they're looking to do, they realize, okay, well then let's fix that so that we can utilize the data to drive the models that we want to be able to improve our business work. So the responsibility for data is within the Chief Data Office, and we are incrementally doing more of that with that acquisition of data responsibility. The data is still currently owned by the different areas. We are looking at whether or not that is the right model. So that will be happening in the next few months. And then looking at that standardization, we've had to drive that. We've left it in the hands of different groups, but they still naturally are focused on their own area of business. They don't have time to start looking at what it means for others. So we are definitely having to drive that. And we're using the use cases to really build that standardization and to look at those semantic layers. Again, needing to understand the larger business. And that's working with the business owners. I keep talking about the business owners, but it's also working with our application developers. So I'm lucky I sit within the IT and digital service area. So they are my colleagues, but there's a big education piece even with application developers to understand what is the bigger problem in the conceptualization and what data is needed throughout the organization. It's not just the inspector that's going to be using this new application that you're designing to look at locomotive cars. It's all of the other areas of the organization that can also use that data, and how do they need, what aspects do they need to be able to do their work. So it's working with them to understand that power of the data in how they're designing the applications for the business requirements of the whole organization, and then moving from there. I think there's a question there, and then there.
Hi, so my question, two-part question, but I'll make it quick. Do you have data coming from third-party companies working in the transportation sector? And I can think of Geotab and fleet management that come to mind really quickly. So just curious if you have integrations with them in order to enrich your data. And secondly, with all the EVs and smart cars hitting the road and new data sources being generated through them, I'm curious how you've sort of integrated the data flows coming from these newer vehicles into your infrastructure and how you're just sort of like using that as well. Thanks.
So yeah, we do have data that comes from multiple sources. So again, being a regulatory department, there are regulations in place that require us to collect information from transportation sector. Think Air Canada letting us know about when they have delays or things like that. And so we are looking to automate some of that data ingestion through APIs and whatnot right into our data ecosystem, rather than it coming in various forms, including paper format, particularly when we're working with CBSA. And that's not a knock on CBSA. Sorry, that sounded really bad. But there are some pretty older systems and older ways of doing things that we want to change. Our inspectors, in some cases, still do paper reporting. We're using forms of AI to take those written notes and create electronic records, but we need to create those applications to be able to do that right off the bat. But so yeah, so a lot of third party through regulatory, with our work with other government departments, I mentioned CBSA, Fisheries and Oceans, and others, where we share similar data requirements for regulatory purposes. And again, there's duplication happening there that we're looking to address so that we don't have to have every department collecting the same data from the same data from the same organizations, but multiple times. It really creates that administrative burden. So we're looking at a tell us once approach to data collection with some of our partners. And then, yeah, and the second question, sorry, I have the integration.
How have you been able to integrate the data from these newer vehicles, such as EVs and smart cars?
So unless there are requirements for us to get that information, that smart car information does not come to transport unless it's for regulatory purposes. So it is identifying where there might be information that could be useful for safety requirements. So that information is coming through from industry per regulatory requirements. But we do have to look at how we might be able to make that process a little bit quicker, let's say, more integrated. Yep. While you're moving the microphone, there's a quick question here. What's the size of my team and the skill sets that we have? So within my chief data office, I have under 20 people. It's quite a small team right now, but that's where we use larger organization and some of the skill sets that exist within the organization to leverage some of the work that we are doing. So the skill sets that we have, I have anything from data scientists, which are both IT and policy focused. I have a policy and governance team, so those are people who come up with all of the strategies and frameworks. So those are very much policy types. And then I have people who are working on data cataloging, so they're a mix of IT because they need to have that technical skill set for the data transformation pieces, along with more administrative type skill sets. That is the team, but working very closely with those who work on the infrastructure. Those teams are a little bit larger. We have a few hundred people who are doing data development and data infrastructure work.
Well, we heard the question about that. What are the other data sources that you are bringing in from different organizations? But do you also have it on your roadmap to share this with the public as a part of government open data and maybe even in real time? Because this is a very valuable, actually, piece of data for anybody who relies on the Transport Canada outside the government.
Yeah, so we are definitely, so Government Canada has open government, which is all about making departments' data available to industry, to the public, better transparency. We have just over 50 data sets up there, not a lot. So that is something that we are working on right now through a new open data strategy that we just actually got endorsed about a month ago. And it's looking at the overall publication of our data. There are different sites that different parts of our business have created to publish data. There's another one called the Transportation Data and Information Hub. There's over 1,200 data sets there. But there's static, largely static information. So as we integrate that data into an open government format, we'll be looking at leveraging Power BI type interactability of the data as we do that so that it has more value.
I had a question. Sorry, you raised your.
Oh, there it is.
It's part application, part automation. I was just curious to understand, like from an application standpoint, specifically you mentioned impact analysis. Do you foresee you and your team doing more of those with time? And are you thinking about automating it? Just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Definitely. I think driving it from a central area allows us to see the larger business requirements of the organization rather than those very siloed applications. So we are looking at how we can be really integrated in that conceptualization phase and in that digital investment phase where the concept cases, and we're actually in that phase right now. We're in the fall, so we are starting to gear up for budget season. So looking at where the business requirements are, the different concept cases, and making those linkages to what we already have that we could leverage and scale, or what we need to look to bring together so that we are not creating all these disparate systems. I didn't get into it in my presentation because it's a whole other aspect. In addition to having the role of Chief Data Officer, I also have responsibility for the enterprise architecture within Transport Canada, which has all of the authorizations to operate. It has the governance around the technical authority committee and our enterprise architecture review board. So I actually chair that aspect as well. So through that role, I'm also able to look at what's coming forward and where we can make those linkages and improvements. So a couple different levers at play. We have a minute left. I see a hand over there.
Thank you. So my question is, so you said that
at the end of the day, business will own the data, right? And you guys have built a centralized platform for business to access easily. So my question is, how do you, so in your experience, anything you can share with, talk about how you can work closely with business unit to develop those catalog? And also, for example, when you do user management to the data source, how do you work with business unit to determine who should be accessing those data access? Because sometimes some people require data access, but they do not have business contact. Business unit will be worried that maybe when they get access, they were not able to interpret the data properly. So there's always a worry who should be getting access to our data. So I like to see what's your tips, anything you want to share with the audience here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is definitely access to the data. We do have some pretty sensitive data. Think transportation of data, dangerous goods, hydrogen, things like that. We have some information that in the wrong hands could be very dangerous. But we also, because we collect information for regulatory purposes, but we're also looking at economic analysis, for instance, we need to make sure that those two purposes stay separate, because we can't have information that's been brought in to do economic analysis used against industry if we haven't collected it for regulatory purposes. So we're making sure that the purpose of the data is very much categorized within the catalog so people understand how and when it can be used for different purposes. So that is requiring us to really look, and also making sure that we're keeping data for the time period that we need to, so the retention and disposition schedules per information management, because right now, data goes in and it stays there forever, and that creates, obviously it's costly, but it also creates issues for access to information. If we don't need to be keeping the data, we do need to get rid of it. And identifying the data stewards. So right now, as I mentioned, Bob was there, he had his data 1, 2, 3. It wasn't really, it was Bob's data, but it's because Bob was the analyst working on that, working with that data, but he really wasn't the data steward. It's just nobody else put their hand up to be the steward. So we're defining who the data owners, data stewards really are and should be to make those decisions on who can and should be accessing the different data sets, and not just because they're the ones using it. So who really is the owner?
All right. Well, that's great. So thanks so much. Join me in thanking Erika here today. Wonderful.